If you're loving this story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me, would you trust a stranger with your life? Because Nathan Blackwell was about to find out what happens when you have no other choice. Subscribe and stay until the end. This one will leave you breathless. The glass of scotch slipped from Nathan Blackwell's hand and shattered across the marble floor of his Boston penthouse. He doubled over, gripping the edge of the kitchen island as a searing pain ripped through his abdomen like a blade twisting from the inside. His jaw locked, his knuckles turned white. For 30 seconds, an eternity, the world reduced itself to a single burning point beneath his ribs. Then slowly, the pain released him. Nathan straightened up, sweat glistening on his forehead, and stared at the broken glass at his feet. 36 years old, $900 million to his name. The founder and CEO of Blackwell Technologies, the fastest-growing cybersecurity firm on the East Coast, and none of it, not one single cent, could buy him an answer. 7 months. That's how long the pain had been eating him alive. 7 months of MRIs, CT scans, blood panels, endoscopies and consultations with the top gastroenterologists in Massachusetts, New York, and even the Mayo Clinic. Every test came back clean. Every specialist shrugged. Stress, they said. Psychosomatic. One particularly condescending doctor at Johns Hopkins had even suggested he try yoga. Nathan didn't do yoga. Nathan built empires. Mr. Blackwell? His assistant Gerald appeared in the doorway with that expression Nathan had come to despise, careful, pitying, like he was handling something fragile. Your 2 o'clock cancelled again? And I have the new caregiver downstairs? Send her away. Sir, this is the 4th one this month. Dr. Whitmore specifically, Dr. Whitmore can add her to the pile of people who have no idea what's wrong with me. Nathan grabbed a towel and wiped the scotch from his hand. I don't need another caregiver hovering around, making notes and telling me to drink more water. Gerald hesitated. He'd worked for Nathan for 6 years, long before the IPO, long before the billions. Back when Blackwell Technologies operated out of a converted garage in Somerville, he knew when to push. Her name is Claire Dawson. She comes highly recommended by the Home Health Agency, and frankly, sir, you fired the last 3 within 48 hours. Perhaps giving this one a chance? Fine. Nathan waved dismissively. Send her up. But if she tries to put me on a juice cleanse, she's gone before dinner. Gerald nodded and disappeared. Nathan crossed the living room, a sprawling open space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, and lowered himself carefully into the leather armchair by the fireplace. Every movement was calculated now, measured against the possibility that the pain would return. He hated that. He hated the way his own body had become a minefield. The elevator chimed. He didn't turn around. He heard footsteps, quiet, measured, not the clicking heels of the last caregiver who'd strutted in like she was auditioning for a reality show. These were soft-soled shoes on hardwood, practical and unhurried. Mr. Blackwell? I'm Claire Dawson. Her voice was steady, not overly warm, not nervously cheerful, just calm, like someone who had walked into difficult rooms before and knew how to hold her ground. Nathan turned his head just enough to see her. She stood near the entrance of the living room, and the first thing he noticed was that she wasn't trying to impress him. No designer bag. No perfect blowout. She wore simple navy scrubs, clean and pressed, her light brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. A small pair of silver earrings caught the light from the window. Her eyes, blue, sharp, assessing, met his without flinching. She was attractive. He noticed that the way he noticed market data, quickly, categorized, filed away, but there was something else, something in her posture that didn't match the job title. She stood the way people stood when they were used to being in charge. You can leave your resume on the counter, he said, turning back to the window. Gerald will review it. Gerald already reviewed it. That's why I'm here. Nathan's eyebrow twitched. Most caregivers responded to his dismissiveness with nervous accommodation. She hadn't moved. I should be transparent with you, Mr. Blackwell, Claire continued, stepping further into the room but maintaining a professional distance. I've read your medical file. The agency shared what your physician authorized. I know you've seen 12 specialists in 7 months with no diagnosis. I also know you've fired 3 caregivers because, and I'm paraphrasing Gerald here, you found them insufferably useless. Nathan turned fully now. Gerald said that? He used more diplomatic language. I'm condensing. But the faintest trace of a smile crossed her lips, not warm exactly, but self-assured, like she could match him, and both of them knew it. Nathan studied her for a long moment. And knowing all that, you still took the job. I took the job because difficult patients are the only interesting ones. He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he felt the dull ache begin to stir beneath his ribs again, and the almost smile died on his face. He pressed his palm flat against his abdomen, an unconscious gesture he'd developed over the past months, as if he could hold the pain in place by sheer force of will. Claire's eyes tracked the movement. She said nothing, but something shifted in her expression, a sharpness, a focus that went beyond casual observation. She looked at him the way a mechanic looks at an engine that's making the wrong sound, not with sympathy, with analysis. When did the last episode occur? She asked. That's in the file. The file says yesterday, but based on the broken glass on your kitchen floor and the way you're guarding your right side, I'd say about 10 minutes ago. Nathan stared at her. 7 months, 12 specialists, and not one of them had ever noticed the way he favored his right side. Your observation skills are impressive for a home caregiver, he said slowly. I'm thorough. Thorough. He repeated the word like he was tasting it. What else are you? Your employee, Mr. Blackwell. Nothing more, nothing less. She set her bag down by the door. Now, with your permission, I'd like to review the layout of the apartment and set up a proper care station. I'd also like to take your vitals. Actual vitals, not the cursory check your last caregiver noted in the log. She took my vitals? She took your blood pressure once while you were eating lunch, which tells me exactly nothing useful. Nathan leaned back in his chair, the pain settling into its familiar low throb. This woman was different. She was clinical where the others had been fawning, direct where they'd been deferential, and there was a precision to her language, a confidence in her medical observations that nagged at him. Home caregivers didn't speak like that. They didn't assess like that. Fine, he said. Set up wherever you want, but I have rules. Don't touch my office. Don't speak to the press if anyone contacts you, and don't, under any circumstances, try to have a heart-to-heart conversation with me about my feelings. Claire pulled a blood pressure cuff from her bag with practiced ease. Mr. Blackwell, I'm here to figure out why you're in pain. Your feelings are entirely your own business. Good, good. She knelt beside his chair and wrapped the cuff around his arm. Her hands were steady, her movements precise. As the cuff inflated, Nathan watched her face, the slight furrow between her brows as she read the gauge, the way her lips pressed together in concentration. Up close, he could see the fatigue around her eyes, carefully concealed but present, the kind of tiredness that came not from late nights, but from carrying something heavy for a long time. 140/92, she said, releasing the cuff. Elevated, consistent with chronic pain, but also worth monitoring independently. 12 specialists noted the same thing. 12 specialists noted it and moved on. I won't. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, something passed between them. Not warmth, not attraction, but recognition. The kind of look two people exchange when they realize the other person is paying closer attention than expected. Then Nathan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. I need to take this. Claire stood, already packing the cuff away. I'll set up in the guest room adjacent to the kitchen. I'll need access to your complete medication list. Everything, including supplements and anything you take without prescription. He was already lifting the phone to his ear, but he paused. You're very demanding for your first day. You're very sick for someone with unlimited resources. I'd say that makes us even. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her steps quiet and assured. Nathan watched her go, the phone ringing in his hand, and for the first time in 7 months, the smallest flicker of something other than frustration stirred in his chest. He didn't know what to call it yet. He answered the phone. "Victoria." "Darling." The voice on the other end was bright, polished, and perfectly calibrated, the vocal equivalent of a designer handbag. Victoria Ashford, his fiancée of 11 months, socialite daughter of real estate magnate William Ashford. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. We need to finalize the guest list for the engagement party. Mother says if we don't confirm the vineyard venue by Friday—" "I had another episode, Victoria." A pause, barely a heartbeat, but Nathan noticed it. He always noticed. "Oh, sweetheart, are you all right? Did you take the medication Dr. Whitmore prescribed?" "The medication doesn't work, you know that." I know. It's just, have you considered that second opinion at Mount Sinai? Daddy knows the chief of—" "I've been to Mount Sinai." Another pause, longer this time. "Well, we'll figure it out, we always do. But listen, about Friday—" Nathan closed his eyes. The pain pulsed. In the kitchen he could hear Claire opening cabinets, methodical, organized. 2 women in his home, one planning a party, the other hunting for answers. He knew which one he needed more. "Confirm the venue," he said flatly. "I'll review the list tonight." "Perfect. Oh, and Nathan, don't let this new nurse get too comfortable. You know how the last ones were, all bleeding hearts and bad advice." He hung up without responding and stared at the harbour. Somewhere in the distance, a ferry horn echoed across the grey water. In the kitchen, Claire Dawson was already building a timeline of his symptoms, cross-referencing the medication log against his hospital records, and noting 3 inconsistencies that no doctor had flagged. Something was very wrong with Nathan Blackwell, and Claire was beginning to suspect that the answer wasn't in any scan or blood test. It was hiding in plain sight. 3 days passed, and Claire Dawson became a quiet constant in Nathan's world. She arrived each morning at exactly 7, let herself in with the keycard Gerald had programmed, and set up her station in the guest room she'd converted into a small clinical space. Her routine was meticulous. Vitals at 7:30, a detailed pain assessment log that she updated every 2 hours, and a running document on her laptop that Nathan had glimpsed once. A dense, color-coded spreadsheet that looked nothing like anything a home caregiver should be producing. He didn't comment on it, not yet. What he did comment on repeatedly was her refusal to be impressed by anything in his penthouse. The first morning, Gerald had given her a tour, the home theatre, the wine cellar, the rooftop terrace with its infinity pool overlooking the harbour. She'd nodded politely at each feature and then asked where the nearest pharmacy was. "Most people at least pause at the wine cellar," Nathan had remarked from his armchair. "I don't drink on the job." "I meant the collection. It's worth—" "I'm sure it's lovely. Have you taken your morning medication?" He'd stared at her. She'd stared back. Gerald had quietly left the room. By day 3, Nathan had developed a reluctant respect for Claire Dawson, along with a growing irritation at his inability to rattle her. He was accustomed to people reacting to his wealth, with envy, with awe, with careful deference. Claire treated his penthouse like a workplace, and him like a patient, nothing more. And yet, paradoxically, she was the first person in months who made him feel seen. It was the details. She noticed that his pain worsened after meals, specifically after his housekeeper's rich dinners. She noticed that he unconsciously held his breath when the pain crested, which elevated his blood pressure. She noticed the way he gripped the armrest of his chair with his left hand, always the left, like an anchor against the waves of agony. And on the morning of day 3, she noticed something else. "Mr. Blackwell, may I ask you a personal question?" Nathan looked up from his tablet. She was standing in the doorway of the living room, holding a manila folder, his medical records, which she'd been studying like a graduate thesis. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes held that sharp, analytical focus that was becoming familiar. "You may ask, I may not answer." "Fair enough." She stepped closer. "Your surgical history shows an appendectomy 14 months ago. Routine procedure performed at Massachusetts General by Dr. Leonard Hale." I remember. What about it? The pain you're describing, its location, its pattern, the way it intensifies after eating and radiates to your right flank. It's consistent with a post-surgical complication, specifically a retained foreign body. Nathan set the tablet down slowly. A retained foreign body. Something left inside during the surgery. A sponge, a clamp, a fragment of surgical material. It happens more often than hospitals admit. The symptoms can take weeks or months to manifest, and they don't always show up on standard imaging, especially if the object is small and the surrounding tissue has begun to encapsulate it. Nathan's jaw tightened. I've had 3 CT scans and 2 MRIs since the appendectomy. Nothing showed up. Standard CT protocols aren't always calibrated to detect soft surgical materials, especially gauze or sponge fragments. They can mimic tissue density. And if the radiologist wasn't specifically looking for a retained body, which they wouldn't be, since the surgical report lists no complications, it could easily be missed. She said all of this calmly, clinically, the way someone presents a well-researched argument. Not guessing, not speculating, diagnosing. Nathan stood. The pain protested, but he ignored it, driven by something stronger. A cold, creeping realization that this woman might be right. That for 7 months, while the finest doctors in America shrugged and suggested yoga, the answer might have been a piece of forgotten surgical gauze, slowly poisoning him from the inside. "How do you know this?" he asked quietly. Claire held his gaze. "I read medical journals. Home caregivers don't read medical journals. This one does." The silence between them was heavy, charged with something neither of them named. Nathan took a step closer. She didn't retreat. "Who are you, Claire Dawson?" "I'm your caregiver, Mr. Blackwell." "No, you're not. Or at least, that's not all you are." He studied her face. The careful composure, the intelligence behind those blue eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders that suggested she was holding something back. "You talk like a doctor. You assess like a surgeon. And that spreadsheet you think I haven't seen, that's not a care log. That's a differential diagnosis matrix." Claire's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. A crack in the armor. Tiny, but real. "I have a background in healthcare," she said carefully, "beyond what my current position requires." "How far beyond?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed the manila folder and looked at him with an expression that was almost vulnerable. "Far enough that I know what I'm talking about, and far enough that the story behind it isn't one I share with patients on day 3. Nathan recognized a wall when he saw one. He'd built enough of his own. Pushing now would only make her retreat further. And for the first time in this nightmare of a medical journey, someone was giving him answers that actually made sense. "All right," he said. "I won't push. But I want to pursue this theory. What do we need?" Claire's shoulders relaxed by a fraction. "A specialized CT scan with contrast, specifically calibrated for foreign body detection. There's a radiologist at Brigham and Women's, Dr. Anita Reeves, who specializes in post-surgical imaging. If there's something in there, she'll find it. Gerald will schedule it today. There's one more thing." Claire hesitated, which was unlike her. "If this theory is correct, if something was left inside you during that appendectomy, it raises questions about how it happened. Retained surgical bodies are almost always accidental, but given your profile, your wealth, and the fact that this particular complication has been conveniently undiagnosed for 7 months, despite extensive testing." She trailed off, letting the implication settle. Nathan felt the ground shift beneath him. "You're suggesting it was deliberate. I'm suggesting you should consider the possibility." The penthouse was very quiet. Outside, the harbor gleamed under a pale winter sun. Inside, Nathan Blackwell stood facing a woman he'd known for 72 hours, a woman who wore scrubs and spoke like a surgeon, who had just suggested, calmly, precisely, that someone might have tried to kill him. "I need to think about this," he said. "Of course. And Claire," she paused at the doorway, "thank you for actually looking." Something softened in her expression, not a smile, but something close, something real. "That's what I'm here for, Mr. Blackwell." "Nathan." She tilted her head slightly. "I prefer to keep it professional. You just told me someone might have planted something inside my body. I think we're past professional." The faintest curve of her lips. "Nathan, then, but only when Gerald isn't listening." "Gerald is always listening." "I know. That's why I said it." She disappeared into the kitchen, and Nathan stood alone in his living room, his mind racing. But beneath the fear and the anger and the growing suspicion, something else was taking root. Something warm and unfamiliar, like sunlight hitting a room that had been dark for a long time. He pushed the feeling aside. He had bigger problems. That evening, Victoria arrived unannounced. She swept into the penthouse in a cloud of Chanel No. 5, and her mess, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile perfectly practiced. Victoria Ashford was, by every conventional measure, stunning. She was also, Nathan had slowly begun to realize, remarkably incurious about his suffering. "Darling, you look terrible," she said, kissing his cheek without actually touching it. "Have you eaten?" "I brought those macarons from that place on Newbury, the ones with the gold leaf." "I'm not hungry." "You're never hungry anymore." "It's worrying." She set the box on the counter and scanned the room. Her eyes landed on Claire's care station, the blood pressure monitor, the laptop, the neatly organized medication chart. "Is that the new nurse's setup?" "It's very clinical." "She's thorough." Victoria picked up the medication chart and glanced at it. "Where is she?" "She left for the day. Her shift ends at 6. "Good. I wanted to talk to you about the engagement party without an audience." She settled onto the sofa and crossed her legs. The picture of elegant ease. "Mother thinks we should add the Warrens to the list. I know you find Douglas Warren dreadful, but his wife just joined the hospital board and—" "Victoria." Nathan sat across from her. "I need to talk to you about something important." "More important than the Warrens?" "Impossible." He didn't smile. "Claire, the caregiver, she has a theory about what's causing my pain. She thinks something was left inside me during the appendectomy, a surgical sponge or some kind of foreign material." Victoria's expression didn't change. It was a subtle thing. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But Nathan had spent his career reading faces across negotiation tables, and he saw it. The briefest freeze. A micro-expression of something that, in a different context, he might have called alarm. Then it was gone, replaced by a sympathetic smile. "Darling, that's absurd. You've had every scan imaginable. If something were inside you, they would have found it." "Not necessarily." She explained that standard imaging protocols. "She's a home caregiver, Nathan, not a surgeon." Victoria's voice carried a gentle but firm dismissal, the tone of someone redirecting a child from a bad idea. "I think it's sweet that she's trying to help, but perhaps she's overstepping. Should I call Dr. Whitmore? He can reassure you." "I don't need reassurance, I need answers. And you'll get them. From actual doctors. Not from someone who changes bedsheets for a living." Victoria stood and smoothed her skirt. "Now, the Warrens, yes or no?" Nathan looked at her, really looked at her. 11 months of engagement, and he tried to remember the last time Victoria had asked a detailed question about his pain. The last time she'd sat with him during an episode, held his hand, shown the kind of focused concern that Claire had demonstrated in 3 days. He couldn't. "Yes, to the Warrens," he said quietly. "And Victoria, I'm scheduling the specialized scan anyway." Something passed across her face. Fast. Dark. Gone. "Of course, darling. Whatever makes you feel better." She kissed his forehead and left. The scent of her perfume lingered in the room like a beautiful lie. Nathan sat in the silence and thought about 2 women. One who smelled like Chanel and dismissed his suffering with a smile, and one who smelled like antiseptic and was trying to save his life. He pulled out his phone and sent Gerald a text. "Schedule the scan at Brigham, priority, and Gerald, run a background check on Claire Dawson. Everything you can find." Then he leaned back and pressed his hand against his abdomen, where the pain lived and pulsed and waited, like a secret that was almost ready to be told. The scan was scheduled for Thursday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Nathan had received Gerald's background report on Claire Dawson, and it changed everything. He sat in his office, the one room Claire wasn't allowed to enter, and read the report twice, 3 times, his fingers tightening on the pages with each pass. The facts were laid out in Gerald's precise, factual style, but the story they told was anything but dry. Claire Elizabeth Dawson, born in Portland, Maine, graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine at 26, surgical residency at Massachusetts General, the same hospital where Nathan had his appendectomy. Specialty, abdominal and gastrointestinal surgery. Published 4 papers before the age of 30. Peer reviews described her as exceptionally gifted and one of the most promising surgical minds of her generation. And then, 2 years ago, it all collapsed. A formal complaint filed by Dr. Marcus Webb, a senior attending at Mass General, accused Claire of gross negligence during a procedure, specifically leaving a surgical instrument inside a patient. The accusation triggered an investigation. Claire maintained her innocence, claiming the instrument count was correct at the end of surgery and that the evidence had been fabricated. But the hospital's internal review sided with Webb. Claire's surgical privileges were revoked. The Massachusetts Medical Board suspended her license pending further investigation. The patient sued. Claire's savings were devoured by legal fees. Within 6 months, Dr. Claire Dawson, brilliant surgeon, published researcher, rising star, was working as a home health aide for $12 above minimum wage. Her career in ruins, her reputation destroyed by a man who, according to several anonymous sources Gerald had found, had a documented history of professional jealousy and a pattern of targeting younger colleagues who outshone him. Nathan closed the folder. His hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the pain. She was a surgeon. Not just any surgeon, a specialist in exactly the kind of procedure that had been performed on him. A specialist in exactly the kind of complication she'd identified. She wasn't guessing. She was diagnosing from experience, from training, from a brilliant mind that had been silenced by injustice, and she was mopping his flaws. The door to his office opened, and Claire appeared with his afternoon medication and a glass of water. She stopped when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Is the pain? When were you going to tell me?" The color drained from her face. She looked at the folder on his desk, and he watched the understanding arrive, the slight widening of her eyes, the almost imperceptible stiffening of her spine. She set the glass down carefully, as if it might shatter. "Gerald ran a background check," she said. "It wasn't a question. He did. And now you know. I know that my home caregiver is actually a Johns Hopkins trained surgeon who specialized in abdominal procedures. I know that you lost your license because of a false accusation by a jealous superior. I know that the woman who identified a post-surgical complication that 12 specialists missed is the most qualified person who's ever walked into this apartment." He stood. "What I don't know is why you didn't tell me." Claire's composure held, but barely. He could see the effort it cost her, the way her jaw tightened, the way she blinked once, hard, as if forcing something back. "Because it doesn't matter," she said quietly. "It matters to me." "Why? Because you want to know my credentials before you trust my medical opinion? You already trusted it. You scheduled the scan." "I trusted it because I could see you knew what you were talking about. Now I know why, and I also know that you've been carrying something that—" "Don't." Her voice was suddenly sharp, a blade cutting through the air between them. "Don't look at me with pity, Nathan. I have had enough pity to last several lifetimes. From former colleagues who crossed the street to avoid me, from friends who stopped calling, from my own mother, who still asks if maybe I should just move on and find a nice office job." Her eyes were bright, fierce, burning with a pain that made his abdominal agony seem trivial. "I didn't tell you because I am not a sob story. I am your caregiver. I am doing my job, and what happened to me does not define my ability to help you." The room was silent, except for the distant hum of the harbor outside. Nathan stood behind his desk. Claire stood in the doorway, and the space between them crackled with something raw and honest and terrifyingly real. "You're right," he said. "It doesn't define you, but it does tell me something important." "What?" "That you're the bravest person I've ever met, and I've sat across from senators and Fortune 500 CEOs. Claire stared at him. For a moment, just a moment, her armor came down. He saw the exhaustion she carried, the grief of a stolen career, the quiet dignity of someone who had rebuilt from nothing without losing herself. And beneath all of it, a flicker of something fragile, surprise. As if being recognized for her courage was the last thing she'd expected. Then she straightened, rebuilt her walls, and picked up the glass of water. "Take your medication, Nathan." "Claire, take your medication. And then we need to discuss your prep instructions for Thursday's scan. No eating after midnight Wednesday. Clear liquids only after 8 p.m. He took the glass. Their fingers brushed. Brief, electric, accidental. Neither acknowledged it, neither pulled away immediately. "For what it's worth," Nathan said quietly, "I'm going to look into Dr. Marcus Webb." Claire's hand froze mid-reach for the medication bottle. "Don't. He destroyed your career with a lie. That deserves nothing from you. My fight is my fight. You have your own problems to solve. Maybe, but I'm starting to think our problems are more connected than either of us realizes." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "Your accusation involved a retained surgical foreign body left inside a patient. That's exactly what you suspect happened to me, at the same hospital, in a surgical department where Marcus Webb still works." He let the words settle. "That's a coincidence I don't believe in." Claire was very still. He could see her mind working, the surgeon's mind, the analytical mind that connected data points and patterns and drew conclusions that others missed. And he could see the moment the possibility hit her, because her face went pale. "You think Marcus was involved in your surgery? I think I need to find out." "Nathan, if that's true, if Marcus deliberately left something inside you, that's not just malpractice. That's assault. That's criminal. I know. And if he did it to you, after framing me for the same thing," she trailed off, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper, "then he's been doing this, systematically, hurting patients and blaming others." The weight of it filled the room like smoke. Nathan saw Claire's hands tremble, the first time he'd ever seen her lose her physical composure, and he acted on instinct. He reached out and took her hand. She flinched. Not from pain or fear, but from the sheer, unexpected tenderness of it. No one had reached for her in a long time. No one had offered strength without expecting something in return. "We'll figure this out," he said. "Together." "I'm your caregiver," she whispered. But the protest was fragile, threadbare. "You're more than that, and we both know it." Their eyes held. The harbor light painted soft shadows across the office, and in that suspended moment, something shifted between Nathan Blackwell and Claire Dawson. Something that couldn't be put back in its box, couldn't be filed under professional relationship, couldn't be dismissed with clinical language or emotional walls. Then Nathan's phone rang. Gerald's name flashed on the screen. "I need to take this," Nathan said, but he didn't release her hand immediately. When he did, the absence of her touch felt like a small wound. He answered, "Gerald." "Sir, I have some additional information regarding the background check. It's significant." "Go ahead." "Doctor, Marcus Webb, the physician who filed the complaint against Ms. Dawson, he was the assisting surgeon during your appendectomy. Not the lead surgeon. That was Dr. Hale. But Webb was in the operating room. He had access." Nathan's blood ran cold. He looked at Claire, who was watching him with an expression of growing dread. "There's more, sir?" "I cross-referenced Webb's professional connections. He has a financial relationship with someone in your circle. Campaign contributions, shared investments, membership at the same club in Back Bay." "Who?" Gerald paused. Richard Hale. Dr. Hale? My surgeon? No, sir. Richard Hale is Dr. Leonard Hale's brother. But the connection isn't to the doctor. It's to someone else who shares that financial network. Another pause. Victoria's father, William Ashford. Webb, Hale and Ashford have been co-investors in a medical real estate fund for the past 4 years. The phone nearly slipped from Nathan's hand. Victoria's father, connected to the doctor who may have sabotaged his surgery, connected to the man who destroyed Claire's career. A web of relationships that he'd never seen, never suspected, that had been spinning quietly around him while he suffered. "Keep digging," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything. Bank records, communications, everything. And Gerald, don't tell anyone about this. Not a soul." He hung up. Claire stood watching him, her arms wrapped around herself as though she were cold. "Nathan, what did he say?" He looked at her. This woman who had lost everything because of men who valued power over people, who had walked into his home carrying nothing but her skill and her dignity, who was slowly, carefully, piece by piece, saving his life. "I think we've been fighting the same enemy," he said, "and I think the scan on Thursday is going to prove it." The pain in his abdomen pulsed, but for the first time in 7 months, it felt like a clue rather than a curse, the body's way of screaming what the mind hadn't yet accepted. Someone had tried to destroy him, someone close, and the only person who could help him now was the woman that same enemy had already tried to destroy once before. Outside, the winter sun dipped behind the Boston skyline, and the shadows in the penthouse grew long and deep. Nathan and Claire stood on opposite sides of the office, closer than they'd ever been, separated by everything and connected by the one thing that mattered most. The truth was coming, and it would change both of their lives forever. The scan changed everything. Dr. Anita Reeves stood in her office at Brigham and Women's Hospital, her face grim behind wire-rimmed glasses, and pointed to the illuminated image on the screen. Nathan sat in the examination chair, still in his hospital gown, his fists clenched on his knees. Claire stood beside him, not as his caregiver, not as his employee, but as something neither of them had defined yet, something essential. "There," Dr. Reeves said, tapping a small, bright anomaly on the CT image. "Right there, adjacent to the cecum, partially encapsulated by scar tissue. That's a retained surgical sponge fragment. Approximately 2 centimeters. It's been causing a slow inflammatory response, which explains the chronic pain, the elevated white blood cell counts that were attributed to stress, and the intermittent fever spikes noted in your records." Nathan stared at the bright spot on the screen. 2 centimeters. A piece of forgotten material smaller than a thumbnail had been eating him alive for 7 months. The relief of finally having an answer collided with a fury so deep it left him breathless. "This should have been identified months ago," Dr. Reeves continued carefully. "The fragment is clearly visible on this calibrated scan. The fact that it was missed on previous imaging suggests that either the protocols were inadequate or," she paused, choosing her words, "or that someone wasn't looking for it, or that someone made sure it wouldn't be found," Nathan said. Dr. Reeves glanced at Claire, then back at Nathan. "I can't speculate on intent, Mr. Blackwell. What I can tell you is that this needs to be surgically removed, soon. The longer it remains, the greater the risk of abscess, fistula formation, or sepsis. I'd recommend scheduling extraction within the week." "Schedule it," Nathan said immediately. "I'll have my office coordinate with your team, and Mr. Blackwell, given the circumstances, I'd strongly recommend having this procedure documented independently. Multiple witnesses, full photographic record of the extraction. If there are legal implications." "There will be," Nathan said. "Thank you, Dr. Reeves." They drove back to the penthouse in silence. Nathan's driver navigated the streets of Boston, while Nathan sat in the back seat, staring out the window without seeing anything. Claire sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence, but not touching. She understood instinctively that this was a silence he needed. It wasn't until they were back in the penthouse, standing in the kitchen, while Gerald made calls in the other room, that Nathan finally spoke. "You saved my life." Claire shook her head. "I identified a complication. Dr. Reeves confirmed it. The surgical team will—" "You saved my life, Claire. 12 doctors missed it. You found it in 3 days." She was quiet for a moment, then softly, "I found it because I've seen it before, because the same lie that destroyed my career taught me exactly what to look for." Her voice carried the weight of irony so bitter it could have broken glass. "Marcus Webb accused me of leaving a sponge inside a patient. I didn't. But I spent months researching retained surgical bodies to build my defense. Imaging protocols, detection methods, case studies. I became an expert in the very thing I was falsely accused of. And now, standing in your kitchen, that expertise is the reason you're alive." Nathan reached for her hand. This time she didn't flinch. Her fingers curled around his, warm and steady, and for a moment they stood in the grey afternoon light, connected by something that transcended employer and employee, patient and caregiver, billionaire and woman in scrubs. "I'm going to make this right," he said, "for both of us." "Nathan, for both of us, Claire." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her expression changed. The warmth drained from her face like water from a cracked vessel. "What is it?" Nathan asked. "It's a message from an unknown number." She turned the screen toward him. 4 words: "Stop digging, walk away." The air in the kitchen turned cold. Nathan took the phone from her hand and stared at the message, his mind already connecting lines, mapping threats, calculating angles, the way he'd built his empire, the way he survived hostile takeovers and corporate warfare. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was his life, her life. "They know," he said. "Someone knows we found it. The scan was at Brigham. Dr. Reeves is trustworthy, but the referral went through your primary care physician's office, which means Dr. Whitmore, who was recommended to me by Victoria's father." The name hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning unseen for months. Nathan pulled out his own phone and called Gerald. "Cancel everything on my calendar for the rest of the week, and I need the full financial dossier on the Ashford Webb connection. Every transaction, every meeting, every communication you can legally obtain. Today." He hung up and looked at Claire. She was staring at the threatening message on her phone, and he could see the fear she was trying to hide. Not fear for herself. He was beginning to understand that Claire Dawson had moved past fearing for herself a long time ago. This was fear for him. "You should distance yourself from this," she said. "From me. If they're watching, if they know I'm the one who found the sponge, being connected to me puts you at risk. I'm not distancing myself from you. Nathan, listen to me. These people destroyed my career without a second thought. They put something inside your body that could have killed you. They are dangerous, and they will not stop because you're rich or powerful. In fact, your power is exactly what they want to take. Then we take theirs first. This isn't a corporate acquisition. You can't leverage your way out of—" "Watch me." His voice was steel, and for the first time Claire saw the man who had built a $900 million empire from nothing. Not the patient, not the man in pain, the warrior. The predator who had outmaneuvered every competitor, every obstacle, every force that had tried to keep him small. The man who didn't lose. But warriors have blind spots, and Nathan's was already walking through the front door. Victoria arrived at 4 o'clock, earlier than usual, with a bouquet of white lilies and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She swept into the penthouse, kissed Nathan on the cheek, and immediately noticed Claire standing in the kitchen doorway. "Oh, you're still here." Victoria's voice was honey-laced with something sharper. "I thought your shift ended at 6. "We had a medical appointment that ran late," Claire said evenly. "Medical appointment?" Victoria turned to Nathan. "Darling, what appointment? You didn't mention anything. The specialized scan I told you about. At Brigham." Victoria set the lilies on the counter. Her movements were casual, unhurried, but Nathan was watching now with new eyes, eyes that had been opened by a threatening text message and a web of financial connections that led straight to her family. He saw the way her hand paused on the counter, the way her gaze flicked to Claire and back, the way she assembled her expression like a woman choosing the right accessory. And what did they find? A retained surgical sponge left inside me during the appendectomy. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God! Nathan, that's horrible. Are you... I'm scheduling surgery to have it removed. Of course. Of course we need to... I'll call Daddy. He knows the chief of surgery at Mass General. We can have this handled discreetly, privately. Not at Mass General, Nathan said, and not through your father's connections. Something shifted in Victoria's demeanor, subtle, like a shadow moving behind glass. What do you mean? Daddy's connections are the best in Boston. Why wouldn't you? Because the surgeon who assisted my appendectomy, Dr. Marcus Webb, has financial ties to your father. And the sponge that was left inside me was left by someone in that operating room. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stood motionless, the lilies forgotten on the counter, her face a mask that was beginning to crack at the edges. That's a very serious accusation, Nathan. It's a very serious situation. You're suggesting that my father, that someone connected to my family, deliberately harmed you. That's absurd. That's insane. Where is this coming from? Her eyes snapped to Claire. From her, your caregiver is filling your head with conspiracy theories and she's a Johns Hopkins-trained surgeon, Victoria. Did you know that? Victoria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. What? Claire Dawson, Dr. Claire Dawson, former surgical resident at Mass General. Her career was destroyed by Marcus Webb, the same Marcus Webb who was in my operating room, the same Marcus Webb who does business with your father. Nathan's voice was measured, controlled, but beneath it ran a current of fury that made the air in the room vibrate. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a pattern. Victoria took a step back. Her composure was crumbling now, the careful architecture of charm and deflection giving way to something raw and cornered. Nathan, you need to stop this. You're not well. The pain has been affecting your judgment. And this woman, this nurse or doctor or whatever she claims to be, she's manipulating you. Can't you see that? The only thing I can see, Nathan said slowly, is that for 7 months you never once questioned why no doctor could find what was wrong with me. You never pushed for answers. You never demanded better care. You planned engagement parties while I was doubled over in pain, and the one person who actually tried to help me is the woman you want me to fire. Tears appeared in Victoria's eyes. Perfect, crystalline, exactly on cue. That's not fair. I love you. I've been worried sick about, then why did someone send Claire a threatening message today, telling her to stop digging? Victoria's tears stopped, just stopped, like a faucet being turned off. And in that moment, in the absence of tears, Nathan saw the truth more clearly than any CT scan could reveal. I think you should leave, Victoria. You can't be serious. I'm removing the ring from the equation until I have answers. If you're innocent, if your father has nothing to do with this, then the investigation will prove it and we can talk. But if I find out that anyone in your circle had a hand in what was done to me... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Victoria gathered her coat with trembling hands, trembling from rage, not sorrow, and Nathan could finally tell the difference. She paused at the elevator, her back straight, her chin lifted, the mask reassembled one final time. You're making a terrible mistake, Nathan, and when you realize it, I won't be waiting. The elevator doors closed. The lilies sat abandoned on the counter, their white petals already beginning to curl. Nathan stood alone in the middle of his penthouse, the harbor darkening outside the windows, and felt the strange, painful liberty of a man who has just burned down something he thought was real and discovered it was always made of paper. Behind him, Claire's voice came quietly from the kitchen doorway. "Are you all right?" He turned. She stood there in her navy scrubs, her hair escaping its bun in soft tendrils around her face, her eyes filled with a concern so genuine it made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with the sponge in his abdomen. "No," he said honestly, "I'm not all right, but I think I'm about to be." She nodded. She understood. She always understood. "Your surgery is in 5 days," she said. "Until then, you need rest, clear liquids after midnight the night before, and someone watching your vitals around the clock. Are you volunteering? I'm doing my job. Claire." He took a step toward her, just one step. "Thank you for everything." She held his gaze, and for a moment the space between them was so charged with unspoken things that the air itself seemed to shimmer. Then she looked away, took a breath, and became the caregiver again. Steady, professional, unbreakable. "Get some rest, Nathan. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." She was right, but she couldn't have known how long, because at that very moment in a brownstone office in Back Bay, Victoria Ashford was placing a call to her father, her voice cold and furious, her words precise. "He knows." And it's the nurse. She figured it out. And William Ashford, seated behind a mahogany desk surrounded by the portraits of old money and older ambitions, replied with 3 words that set the final act in motion. "Then end it." The surgery was successful. Dr. Reeves extracted the sponge fragment in a 45-minute procedure at Brigham and Women's, with 2 independent surgical observers, a full photographic record, and a chain of custody documentation process that would hold up in any courtroom in Massachusetts. The fragment, a 2-centimeter piece of radiopaque surgical sponge, was sealed, labeled, and sent to an independent forensic laboratory for analysis. Nathan woke from anesthesia to find Claire sitting in the chair beside his hospital bed. Not Gerald, not Victoria. "Claire, how do you feel?" she asked. He took a moment to assess. The dull, grinding ache that had been his constant companion for 7 months was gone, not diminished, not managed. Gone. In its place was the clean, sharp soreness of a fresh incision, pain with a purpose, pain that meant healing. "Like someone took a rock out of my shoe," he said. His voice was rough from the anesthesia, but the relief in it was unmistakable. Claire smiled, a real smile, unguarded, the first he'd ever seen from her. It transformed her face, lit up her eyes, softened the careful composure she wore like armor, revealed the woman beneath the walls. Nathan stared at her and thought, with absolute clarity, "I am in love with this woman." The thought didn't surprise him. It settled into place like something that had always been true, just waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. "The forensic lab will have preliminary results in 72 hours, Claire said, her smile fading as the clinical mind reasserted itself. "If the sponge fragment matches the type used at Mass General during your appendectomy, that establishes provenance. Combined with the surgical records and the connection between Webb and your circle, it builds a strong case." "Gerald has more," Nathan said. He reached for the cup of water on the bedside table, and Claire handed it to him. A simple gesture, but her fingers lingered near his for a moment longer than necessary. "He's been working with a forensic accountant. The Ashford-Webb financial connection is deeper than we thought. Webb received 3 payments totaling $200,000 from a shell company that traces back to Ashford Holdings. The payments were made in the 12 months before my appendectomy." Claire absorbed this. Her face was pale but composed. Prepayment. They paid him before the surgery. Which means it was planned, not an accident, not negligence. Someone paid Marcus Webb to leave that sponge inside me. But why? What would the Ashfords gain from making you sick? Nathan had been asking himself the same question during every sleepless night of the past week. The answer, when it finally crystallized, was so simple and so ugly that it almost made him laugh. "Control," he said. "Victoria and I got engaged 11 months ago. My appendectomy was 14 months ago, 3 months before the engagement. William Ashford approached me about a merger between Blackwell Technologies and Ashford Holdings Tech Division right around the same time. I turned him down. It wasn't a good deal for my shareholders." And then you got sick. And then I got sick. Mysteriously, inexplicably sick. Sick enough that I couldn't focus on the business. Sick enough that Victoria became my primary emotional support. Sick enough that I started relying on her family's connections for medical care, their doctors, their recommendations, their networks. All while the merger offer sat on the table, waiting for me to be desperate enough, distracted enough, weakened enough to sign. Claire's eyes widened. They were engineering dependency, making you need them while simultaneously weakening your ability to run your company independently. And if I'd eventually married Victoria, the Ashford family would have had direct access to Blackwell Technologies through the marriage. Community property, board influence, social leverage. They were playing the long game. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of the cardiac monitor. Claire sat very still, processing the full scope of what they were facing. Not just a medical crime, but a calculated conspiracy to dismantle a man's health, his autonomy, and his empire, piece by piece, under the guise of love and family. "There's something else you need to know," Nathan said. His voice had changed, softer now, heavier with something that wasn't physical pain. "Gerald found communications between Webb and William Ashford that reference your case specifically." Claire went rigid. "What?" "Webb's accusation against you, the fabricated negligence claim. It wasn't random professional jealousy. It was strategic. You were a rising star at Mass General, a brilliant surgeon specializing in abdominal procedures. If anyone was going to catch what they'd done to me, it was someone with your exact expertise. So they removed you first." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything Claire believed about the worst chapter of her life. She had spent 2 years believing that Marcus Webb destroyed her career out of petty jealousy, that she was collateral damage of one man's fragile ego. But this was different. This was premeditated. She had been targeted, dismantled, and discarded, not because Webb felt threatened by her talent, but because her talent threatened a conspiracy. They destroyed her to protect their plan. She wasn't collateral damage. She was their first victim. Claire stood abruptly from the chair. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass, looking out over the grey expanse of Boston. Her shoulders were trembling. Nathan watched her and felt his heart crack along fault lines he didn't know existed. "Claire, 2 years, she whispered. 2 years I blamed myself. Not for the accusation. I knew I was innocent. But for not fighting harder, not being smarter, not finding a way to prove it. I thought I failed. I thought if I'd been better, stronger, more prepared, I could have saved my career." Her voice broke. "I cleaned floors, Nathan. I changed bedsheets and took blood pressure readings and swallowed my pride every single day because I thought the world had simply been unfair, the way the world sometimes is. But it wasn't unfair. It was calculated. They looked at my life and decided it was acceptable collateral for their scheme." Nathan pushed himself up in the bed, ignoring the pull of the incision. "Claire, look at me." She turned from the window. Tears streamed down her face, not the theatrical tears Victoria had weaponized, but real tears, hot and uncontrolled, the kind that come from a wound so deep it takes years to reach. "They took everything from me," she said. "My patience, my research, my identity. I was a surgeon, Nathan. I saved lives, and they took that from me so they could hurt you and no one would catch it." Nathan reached for her hand. She came to his bedside and took it, and he pulled her gently closer until she was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, her hand in both of his, her tears falling onto the white sheets. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm and tender at once. "They didn't take everything. They took your license, your title, your income. But they didn't take your mind. They didn't take your skill. They didn't take the instinct that walked into my apartment and diagnosed in 3 days what 12 specialists missed in 7 months. He lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. "You saved my life, Claire. The very thing they tried to destroy in you is the thing that saved me. They failed. Do you understand? They failed." She looked at him through her tears, and something shifted in her expression. A breaking and a rebuilding happening simultaneously, like watching a sunrise through shattered glass. The grief was still there, would probably always be there in some form, but beside it now stood something stronger. Recognition, validation, the knowledge that her suffering had not been meaningless, that her skills had not been wasted, that the woman they tried to bury had risen and done exactly what she was born to do. "We're going to take them down," Nathan said. "All of them. Webb, Ashford, everyone involved. We're going to restore your license, clear your name, and make sure they never do this to anyone again." "How?" "I've already contacted the best medical malpractice attorney in Boston, Patricia Chen. She's reviewed the preliminary evidence and she's ready to move. Criminal complaints with the DA's office, civil suits, and a formal petition to the medical board to reopen your case with new evidence." Claire stared at him. "You did this while planning your own surgery?" "I did this because it matters, because you matter." The cardiac monitor beeped steadily in the silence that followed. Claire looked at their joined hands, her small, capable surgeon's hands wrapped in his larger ones, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt something she had stopped believing in. Hope. "Nathan," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Anything. That first day, when I walked into your penthouse and you told Gerald to send me away, I almost left. I was tired of difficult patients, tired of being treated like less than what I am, tired of the whole exhausting performance of being invisible. But then I saw you press your hand against your side, and I recognized the gesture. I'd seen it before in my patients, in my research, and something in me, the surgeon, the doctor, the part of me they couldn't kill, that part wouldn't let me walk away. I'm glad it didn't." "So am I." She paused. "But that's not what I need to tell you. What I need to tell you is that somewhere between day 3 and now, between the diagnosis and the threatening texts and watching you confront Victoria, I stopped being your caregiver. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was when you held my hand in your office. Maybe it was when you said you'd look into Webb, not for yourself, but for me. Maybe it was when you chose the truth over a beautiful lie." She took a breath. "I have feelings for you, Nathan. Real feelings. And I know the timing is terrible, and I know the power dynamic is complicated, and I know that getting involved with a patient, a former patient, goes against everything I was trained to." He kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or movie perfect. It was careful, because he was still recovering from surgery, and tender, because she was still recovering from something much deeper. His hand came up to cup her face, and her fingers tightened around his, and the kiss was gentle and fierce and full of everything they'd both been carrying alone for too long. When they pulled apart, Claire's eyes were still wet, but she was smiling. That real smile, the one that made the whole room brighter. "For the record," Nathan murmured, "I started falling for you when you told me my blood pressure was elevated and then didn't apologize for it." She laughed, a sound he realized he'd never heard from her before. Light, warm, genuine. Most people don't find medical assessments romantic. Most people haven't been looking for answers as long as I have. She leaned her forehead against his, and they stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, sharing the same space. Two people who had been broken by the same enemy and had somehow found each other in the wreckage. Outside the hospital window, Boston glittered under a clearing sky. And in a forensic laboratory across town, the analysis of a 2-centimeter sponge fragment was already revealing truths that would shake the foundations of 2 of the city's most powerful families. The endgame had begun. 3 months later, the courtroom was standing room only. The case of Blackwell versus Webb, Ashford et al., had become the most talked about medical malpractice trial in Massachusetts history, drawing coverage from every major news outlet in Boston and beyond. The combination of elements, a tech billionaire, a disgraced surgeon, a destroyed career, a calculated poisoning disguised as surgical negligence, and a love story that had emerged from the wreckage, was irresistible to the public. Nathan sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing a charcoal suit and an expression of quiet determination. Beside him, Claire sat in a navy blue dress that was professional and elegant. No scrubs, no apron, no uniform of servitude. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders, and she held herself with the posture of a woman who had stopped hiding. Patricia Chen, their attorney, was methodical and devastating. She presented the forensic analysis of the sponge fragment, confirmed to match the surgical inventory of Mass General's Operating Room 7, where Nathan's appendectomy had been performed. She presented Gerald's financial documentation, the shell company payments from Ashford Holdings to Marcus Webb, totaling $200,000, made in the months preceding the surgery. She presented the communications between Webb and William Ashford, discussing the timeline and the expected recovery complications. And then she called Claire to the stand. Claire walked to the witness box with the calm, measured steps of someone who had spent 2 years preparing for a moment she never knew was coming. She was sworn in, sat down, and looked directly at the jury. Patricia's questions were precise. Dr. Dawson, can you describe your qualifications prior to the complaint filed by Dr. Marcus Webb? Claire's voice was steady. I graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. I completed my surgical residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, specializing in abdominal and gastrointestinal surgery. I published 4 peer-reviewed papers and received the Departmental Award for Clinical Excellence in my 2nd year of residency. And what happened to your career? Dr. Webb filed a complaint accusing me of leaving a surgical instrument inside a patient during a routine procedure. I was investigated, my surgical privileges were revoked, and my medical license was suspended. I lost everything I had built. Were the accusations true? No. The instrument count at the end of the surgery was correct. The evidence against me was fabricated. And do you now know why you were targeted? Claire paused. She looked at the defense table, where Marcus Webb sat between his attorneys, his face ashen, his arrogance stripped away like paint in a storm. Beside him, William Ashford sat rigid, his jaw clenched, the portrait of a powerful man watching his empire unravel. Yes, Claire said. I was targeted because my expertise posed a direct threat to their plan. They intended to harm Nathan Blackwell by leaving a foreign body inside him during surgery, a procedure I specialized in detecting and treating. By destroying my career and removing me from the medical field, they eliminated the person most likely to identify what they had done. The courtroom murmured. The judge called for order. Patricia continued building her case brick by brick until the evidence formed a wall that no amount of money or influence could scale. The defense tried. Webb's attorney argued coincidence, professional disputes taken out of context, circumstantial financial connections, but the forensic evidence was irrefutable. The sponge fragment had been confirmed, the payments had been traced, and a forensic data analyst had recovered deleted emails from Webb's personal server that explicitly discussed the plan, emails that referenced Victoria Ashford by name as the person who had facilitated Nathan's surgical appointment with the specific team that included Webb. When those emails were read aloud, Victoria, seated in the back of the courtroom in dark sunglasses, trying to be invisible, stood and walked out. She did not return. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Marcus Webb was found liable for medical battery, fraud, and conspiracy. The criminal referral, already in progress, would lead to his arrest within the week. William Ashford was found liable for conspiracy and tortious interference. His assets in the medical real estate fund were frozen pending further investigation. The Medical Board of Massachusetts, presented with the trial evidence, reopened Claire's case the following week. Her license was reinstated with full privileges within a month, accompanied by a formal letter of apology that Claire read once, folded carefully, and placed in a drawer. The money, the settlement, the damages, the restitution was enormous, but it was the least important thing Nathan won that day. What mattered was the moment after the verdict, when Claire stepped out of the courthouse into the November sun and Nathan was waiting for her on the steps. She stood there, blinking in the light, and he could see the weight lifting from her shoulders. 2 years of injustice, silence, and survival falling away like chains from a freed prisoner. "Dr. Dawson," he said, walking toward her. "How does it feel?" She looked at him. The man who had started as her difficult patient, who had become her partner in uncovering the truth, who had funded her legal defense without being asked and fought for her reinstatement with the same ferocity he brought to corporate warfare. The man who had chosen her over his fiancée, over convenience, over the comfortable lie. "It feels like waking up," she said. He took her hand, right there on the courthouse steps, with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. He took her hand and held it like it was the most natural thing in the world, because it was. "I have a question for you," he said. "If it's about my blood pressure, it's probably elevated." He grinned. "I was going to ask if you'd have dinner with me tonight, not as a patient and caregiver, not as co-plaintiffs, just as 2 people who somehow found each other in the middle of a disaster." "Dinner," she repeated. "That sounds suspiciously like a date." "It is a date, a proper one, with reservations and everything. Gerald made them." "And Gerald makes all your romantic gestures for you?" "Gerald makes the reservations. The romantic gestures are all me." She laughed, that warm, genuine sound that he had come to treasure above everything else. "Then yes, dinner, tonight." They had dinner that night at a quiet restaurant in the North End, not the most expensive place in Boston, because Nathan was learning that the best things weren't always the most costly. They talked for hours, not about the trial, not about Webb or Ashford or Victoria, about books they loved, about places they wanted to see, about Claire's dream of opening a surgical training clinic for underserved communities, about Nathan's growing realization that his company needed to mean something beyond profit margins. They talked like 2 people discovering each other for the first time, which in many ways they were. The crisis had brought them together, but the love they were building now was something entirely separate, something that existed because of who they were, not because of what had happened to them. The weeks that followed were a slow, beautiful reconstruction. Claire returned to medicine. She accepted a position as attending surgeon at Brigham and Women's in the department of Dr. Anita Reeves, who had been so impressed by Claire's diagnostic brilliance that she personally advocated for the hire. On her first day back in the operating room, Claire stood at the surgical table with steady hands and tears in her eyes, and performed a flawless procedure that reminded everyone in the room why she had once been called the most promising surgeon of her generation. Nathan restructured Blackwell Technologies with a new focus on healthcare innovation. He established the Dawson Initiative, named over Claire's embarrassed protests, after the woman who had shown him that technology meant nothing without human compassion. The initiative funded advanced surgical safety systems, post-operative monitoring technology, and a fellowship program for surgeons from disadvantaged backgrounds. Gerald continued to manage Nathan's life with quiet efficiency, and if he noticed that his boss smiled more, worked less obsessively, and had stopped pressing his hand against his abdomen, he didn't comment on it directly. He simply adjusted the calendar to include more dinners for 2. As for the others, Marcus Webb was arrested, charged with assault and conspiracy, and stripped of his medical license permanently. He would serve 3 years in federal prison and never practice medicine again. The patients he had harmed, including the one Claire had been falsely accused of injuring, came forward during the trial, and their testimonies sealed his fate. William Ashford's empire crumbled under the weight of investigation. His medical real estate fund was dissolved, his reputation in Boston's social circles destroyed. He retreated to a family property in Connecticut and was rarely seen in public again. Victoria Ashford left Boston entirely. She surfaced briefly in social media posts from various European cities, Milan, Monaco, Paris, carefully curated images of a life that looked perfect from the outside. Nathan saw one once, scrolling through his phone late at night, and felt nothing. Not anger, not regret, not even pity. Just the quiet certainty that the most beautiful cage is still a cage, and he had finally walked free. Dr. Leonard Hale, the lead surgeon during Nathan's appendectomy, was cleared of direct involvement, but censured for failing to maintain proper oversight of his surgical team. He retired quietly, his reputation diminished, but his freedom intact. 6 months after the trial, on a warm spring evening, Nathan took Claire for a walk along the harbor. The sun was setting over Boston, painting the water in shades of gold and copper, and the city hummed with the gentle energy of a world moving forward. They walked hand in hand, her head occasionally resting against his shoulder, the silence between them comfortable and full. "I have something for you," Nathan said. "If it's another donation to the clinic in my name, I swear it's not a donation." He stopped walking and turned to face her. The harbor light caught her eyes, those sharp, brilliant, beautiful eyes that had seen through his pain and his walls and his entire carefully constructed fortress and had found something worth saving underneath. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small velvet box. Claire stared at it. Then she stared at him. "Nathan Blackwell, if that's what I think it is, it's exactly what you think it is. We've been officially dating for 5 months. And I've been in love with you since day 3. The math works in my favor." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not the ostentatious diamond Victoria had worn, but a simple, elegant band with a sapphire that matched Claire's eyes, set in platinum. Classic, understated, like her. "Claire Elizabeth Dawson," he said, and his voice, the voice that commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, trembled slightly with an emotion no business school could teach. "You walked into my life when I was at my worst. You saw through every wall I built. You saved my life with your brilliance and then saved my soul with your heart. I don't deserve you, but I'm asking, with everything I am, if you'll let me spend the rest of my life trying to." Claire looked at the ring. She looked at the harbor. She looked at the man kneeling before her. A man who had been arrogant and closed and afraid, who had learned humility from her strength, compassion from her sacrifice, and love from her courage. "You're completely insane for proposing on the waterfront in this wind," she said, and her voice was thick with tears and laughter. "My hair is a disaster. You're beautiful, and you're still kneeling on wet pavement. I'll kneel all night if I have to." She pulled him to his feet, took his face in her hands, those steady, capable surgeon's hands, and kissed him. Long, deep, thorough, the kind of kiss that rewrites endings and begins new stories and proves that the most broken roads sometimes lead to the most extraordinary destinations. "Yes," she whispered against his lips, 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly because Gerald had secretly measured her ring size 3 weeks ago using a piece of string and the cunning of a man who had been waiting for his boss to come to his senses. They were married in October, in a small ceremony at a vineyard in the Berkshires. Claire wore white. Nathan wore a smile that Gerald later said he'd never seen before in 10 years of service. Dr. Anita Reeves served as a bridesmaid. Patricia Chen raised the first toast. There were no Ashfords on the guest list. After the ceremony, as they danced their first dance under a canopy of fairy lights and autumn leaves, Claire leaned close to Nathan's ear and whispered something that made him laugh so hard the entire reception turned to look. "What did she say?" Gerald asked Patricia Chen. Patricia smiled. She told him his blood pressure was probably elevated. Damn, and it was, because some things, the best things, the truest things, are supposed to make your heart race. Nathan Blackwell had spent 7 months searching for what was wrong inside him. He'd found a sponge, a conspiracy, and a lie dressed in Chanel and white lilies. But he'd also found Claire Dawson, a woman who wore scrubs and changed his world, who proved that the most important things in life aren't built in boardrooms or bought with billions. They're discovered in the quiet courage of showing up, looking closer, and refusing to walk away.